From using a poop emoji to tackle tough conversations, to turning a group lunch order into a celebration of identity, New York City Chair George Janson blends Big Apple directness with his trademark deep empathy to reveal how leadership can be both powerful and playful. Welcome to the Chair-isma podcast. I'm Francine Lasky. I created this podcast because the wisdom within our chair community is too valuable to stay hidden in one-on-one conversations. Let's meet George. Hi, welcome to Chair-isma. Today's guest is George Janson, one of my favorite chairs from New York City. Welcome.
Hi, Francine.
Hey.
So nice to be here. I love the name of your podcast, too.
Thank you. So I'm going to start out with our little warm-up, which is, I don't believe anybody is all one thing or another. So I'd like to ask you some ratios about some things in your life. Paper books or e-reader?
70% paper.
Morning person or night owl?
95% morning. My night owl days have long passed.
Time or money?
50-50.
All right, text or call?
Text, 80%. Call, 20%. I am not a huge phone talker or gabber.
Would it surprise you that most Vistage chairs answer the same thing?
I'm not surprised. People just cut to the chase, no bullshit.
Last one. You ready? This is the most important one. What is your ratio of peanut butter to jelly?
70% peanut butter, 30% jelly, which leads me to my favorite Halloween candy, Reese's Peanut Butter Cups.
It is the number one Halloween candy. So I'd like to start with the question, why do you do this work?
What I like to do is to create moments of wonder and belonging. So I would say the wonder is born out really of my natural curiosity, into exploring new places, new things, meeting new people. I think it's the wonder of seeing a great movie, a sporting event, reading a great book. And, I think it's also the wonder that's born out of what happens in Vistage, right? Creating these aha moments for people, right? When I see that in the meeting. So I really want to be an engine, that helps fuel that for my groups and also, in my personal life as well. And I think the belonging comes certainly, on a personal level from having experienced moments of not feeling like I belonged or not feeling like I was a part of. And so I'm very intentional in my groups that everyone feels like they have a voice, even the quietest person in the room. So I will do things, very gently to make sure that they're heard.
Tell me about how you achieve that. Like what very intentional things do you do to make belonging kind of one of the highest values in the group?
Well, I think belonging is just, I'll give you a very simple example. Is when we're doing issue processing, right? If I feel like the person, is holding back, sometimes a quiet person, I will just say, Nunzio, I know you're an expert in this area. So what is the suggestion you might have that could benefit from the group? Instead of saying, Nunzio, we haven't heard from you. You must have a question, right? So it's being very thoughtful because, that's not going to work the latter with people who aren't, let's say, so dominant when it comes to, particular disc profile. And just, sometimes in a room, there can be people who are called ball hogs, right? And they want to be heard the most. And so sometimes I might ask them to hold back, and say, okay, let's hear from someone who hasn't spoken yet. And, that's great. Let's put it in a parking lot so that everyone has their day or a moment, I would say.
How do you deal with someone who is that ball hog? And how do you facilitate around them where they're like, no, I was talking. Like, I've got a really good point. What techniques do you use for that?
One technique is to look away from them. Or to gaze at them, then move on to someone. Like I will say, okay, we're going to get to that later. Then just, my gaze or attention to someone else. So knowing that they were heard, but, now's not the time necessarily. Again, doing things, saying things like, oh, thank you. I really appreciate that, your input. but I think it's good we hear some other perspectives around the room as well, because what happens is groupthink can take over, right? And so people might rally around this one person just because they're so dominant. And surprise, surprise, it's not that uncommon in a Vistage group that we have lots of people who are dominant, right? Who are the D in the DISC personality assessment. So it's really managing that. But I think I'm also intentional when I recruit for people that I want people who represent, different ends of the DISC spectrum, if you will.
Do you put in any special rules around issue processing or even common practices that you do to accommodate for your I's or your C's in the group?
So I is
I
interact.
is the people, right? One of mine is I have a C in my group. When she processes issues, the D's are not allowed to ask multiple questions. One question, stop. Right? The C gets overwhelmed. They're a detail-oriented person. They want to listen to every single detail. So multiple questions is not something that they're comfortable with. What about you? Anything you do?
One thing I'll do sometimes during issue processing is, let's say the members who are D, they can only ask questions as another profile would. That's the opposite of them.
Oh,
Okay.
wow.
So maybe having a D ask questions like a C would, right? Because Ds aren't typically into all of the details, right? And the
That's
data.
so
But
interesting.
C is, so it gets them thinking, right? Just a little bit differently and hopefully being able to relate a little more to that other person.
Wow. That is kind of mind-blowing for me. I love that idea. I think that stretches not only the person who's processing the issue, but the person asking the question to put them in a zone of safe discomfort, right?
Right.
So
Right.
really
And
cool.
sometimes I can see the Ds, because I do a lot of different things like that. And I could see the Ds like their eyes are rolling. And I'll even call them out and say, I could see your eyeballs rolling down Fifth Avenue. Can you let's give this a shot? Okay. Then everyone laughs. And
I,
they like it at the end of the day. So
I what do you think your members think is your superpower?
I think it's a combination of being direct, but also being caring and empathetic. I could spot BS a mile away. And so, I'll call a person out on that. And even in the room, we have a poo emoji. You know what that is, right, Fancy? So
Sure.
we'll throw it at someone if they're bullshitting, or I also use it for issue processing if someone's giving a suggestion, right? So have you thought about this? So it's under the guise of a question, but it's a suggestion. So we throw the poo emoji, and I'll have a suggestion monitor sometimes who will hold the poo emoji. And so, it calls attention to why, we shouldn't be doing that, but in a way that's fun.
Very fun. Do you think that's your superpower?
Yes. I think empathetic, caring, that comes out a lot. I don't know if you asked me that question 15 years ago, that's how I would have responded. Because I may have seen weakness in the empathy part of it, but now it's something that I recognize as a strength in people. And I'm trying to bring that out of people as well, who may not want to talk about that side of them.
What's a good story that you have about a breakthrough that you had in somebody's vulnerability?
There was a member that was not very vulnerable. That was like a brick wall. Everything was always fine, right? So I talked to him before he was doing his host presentation about, let's let the members get to know you a little bit better. And so he talked about a painful experience from his childhood, that his family had a business that was multiple generations, and they told him he couldn't be a part of that business. It was the brother and the father who were running it, and really how much that impacted him, contributed to his maybe lack of self-confidence early in his career. And that was like a light bulb moment, I think, that went off for the group. And the group was also, because it's not about me, it's about the group at the end of the day. And I truly believe that, Francine, that took me maybe a year or so to get that, because I want to be perfect sometimes, right? Who does? So the group also, would give feedback. We'd love to get to know you a little bit better. And, you're very good at helping other people, but when it comes to you know, you're not so open sometimes. And so everyone applauded him, and I was really proud of him for showing courage in that moment, right? Because we're not going to change people, right? We don't have a magic wand, but we can make it easier for them, right? To bring out parts of them that maybe they haven't exposed as much because it's painful, but doing so in a very respectful manner.
I couldn't agree more. I have a member too who I've seen blossom over the last 2 years, maybe, because the group was willing to listen to something that she thought nobody wanted to hear, right? And for whatever reason, that just allows her to be more herself. So I couldn't agree more.
Right. And respecting that people are different and
Yeah.
people get values in different ways from a meeting. That just because someone maybe isn't as vulnerable or forthcoming does not mean that I'm a bad chair either, or that they're a bad person and not a good
Let,
member.
let's go into that for a second, because something you said really interested me, which is it's all about the group. It's not about you. How do you know how much to interject of yourself, right? It is about the group,
Sure.
but you're the leader. So how do you determine where that line is?
Certainly when I see things going off course, in a way that's not productive, a lot of times that can happen in issue processing, so just keeping things on track. I'm very mindful of time too, but I'm also flexible. So if we're in the midst of a very serious, important conversation, I'm not going to say, okay, we have to cut it loose because the agenda says that. That's awful. I think I did some of that in the beginning. So following the room, and where people are at that particular day.
Do you ever have moments of self-doubt that you're like, I think this is done, and maybe it's not really done? Or I think, we've gone too far and you really haven't yet.
All the time. I asked for feedback in my new advancing leader group. One of the members said, I felt like maybe we could have spent more time in this particular area. And I also think it's modeling vulnerability sometimes. So if I'm going to ask a tough question and I could see people's wheels are spinning, they may look uncomfortable. I say, okay, I'll start. And then it sort of gets everyone else feeling a little more comfortable, perhaps. But yeah, I know chairs who they're more in the consultant mode, and that's not me. I'm very particular about that. If I have expertise in an area, I spent most of my career in advertising, marketing on the media side, then I may say something, tell a little story, areas where I feel comfortable, but I'm not going to interject in areas where I'm really not an expert, especially when it comes to some of the financial stuff around acquisitions, mergers, sale. I learn a lot too, from my members when it comes to some of those other things, but I don't need to be an expert. I just need to ask the right questions around those subjects.
If you're in an issue processing, and you see a question that hasn't been asked, what do you do?
99% of the time, it's because we have heard hours, emotions, relationships, dollars. And I truly believe, and I say this till I'm blue in the face, that the heart of nearly every issue are the emotions, right? And the relationships. But CEOs, right? They're problem solvers. So they immediately go to hours and time. So when I see that happening, I'll say, okay, let's ask some more questions around feelings or emotions, or I'll even ask the question. So how are you feeling when this happened? I also love asking about being states. So how do you feel you're being in this particular moment? I'll ask the member processing the issue. And then I'll ask other members. And I even have a sheet of different being states. And so what's a disempowering being state, that this member is exhibiting in this particular situation? And then I flip it and say, what would be, an empowering being state, and how can you get there?
So helpful. Could you share that being state sheet with us?
Sure.
And I'll put it on the website. So that'd be great.
Yes. And I'm sure, honestly, I got some from someone in Vistage. I don't know if it was Bob Dabbick, maybe, or someone, but yeah, it's really helpful.
I think it's so helpful to have it while you're processing the issue. And
Absolutely.
there's so many things that are going on. You're paying attention to the conversation, you're paying attention to the flow, you're paying attention to people's emotions, their body language. And you're also, if you had this list in front of you, you don't have to be going through that Rolodex in your head to say, all right, where do I want to go next? Even if it's just a reminder about asking that question or going down that road, I think it's so helpful. I was talking to another chair, and he was talking about, as a member, you really don't realize how complex issue processing is, that you think it's just keeping track of who's next, right? And there's so much more that's going on behind the
No,
scenes.
absolutely. And making sure the questions are really related to the issue at hand, right? But that said, sometimes the issue is really something else. So it's being open to, renomination of the issue, perhaps as you peel more layers of the onion. People are complex, right? And so
Well,
the issues that were
we'd be
bring
out of a we'd be out of a job if they weren't complex. So
value. Absolutely. Which makes this job so interesting, I think.
for sure. So let's talk. I'm going to pivot a little bit to you and your chair practice. What boundaries do you set up? This job is a lot of giving, a lot of listening. What boundaries do you set up around you to make sure your energy and your bandwidth stays at its maximum?
One boundary I have, and my friends joke with me about this because I go to bed typically by 9:30 or 10. So I will tend to shut my phone off around maybe an hour before I go to bed, but that's an important boundary, especially before a meeting day, right? When members will start to text, email, oh, something came up, I can't be there tomorrow, right? I don't want that energy, with me as I'm going to the bed, as I want to be really refreshed in the morning, as I treat every meeting like it's a new business pitch. Back in my advertising days, that I have to win over everyone every single month, right? And keep them engaged and keep them coming back. Because for some people, it could take one bad meeting. Hopefully not, people know you and trust you after a while. But yeah, I always want to make sure that I'm keeping things lively and engaging with them, whether there's one person there, look, had that happen, or 18, right? Because my job is to give who's ever there the most valuable experience that they could possibly get from Vistage. And sometimes it's those smaller meetings, right, where people come back and say, this is one of the best meetings I ever had. And so also not letting that affect my energy, right? In the morning when I'm getting texts, there was a fire, there was train delays, there's traffic delays, is not letting the group see that anxiousness in me, which I think I did a little bit of that in the beginning. And now I let it go because there's nothing I can do about it. I'm powerless over that. I can't control the weather and, you know, the New York City Transit Authority or Metro North. So I'm just more there and present. And I think another boundary, Francine, is when people keep canceling or rescheduling
Mm.
their one-to-ones, is having an honest conversation, being radically candid, like what's really going on here? How can you make this a priority? And what value would you like to be getting? Maybe that you don't feel like you are. So that's certainly a boundary. What's one of your boundaries? Curious, that's
Huh, that's a good question. I have 3 meetings in a row. So I have a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. That Friday I take off, right? So that
well,
Friday, and sometimes I can't take off the whole day, but I'll definitely take the morning off. Like, I am depleted. I don't want to listen to anybody anymore. I feel like my attention span is just out, right?
and sometimes what I'll do, Francine, is after like a meeting day, I'll have pizza
Yeah.
or something just to sort of reward myself because, the energy you're spent, right?
Yeah.
But one thing I do, I guess for the past year, is I have my assistant block Fridays from 1 to 5. So I do not do any coaching between 1 to 5 on a Friday because I think it's the absolute worst time to do
Mm.
coaching. I know that I'm not going to be as sharp then, and also most of the members aren't going to be in a place necessarily where they're going to get the most at that particular session. And I don't want them to feel like they ever got less than from me because I'm not at 100%. Just sometimes I will go to the gym or take a walk, ride a bike, meet a friend for lunch even. And I'll even, I'd rather work extra hours during the week or even a few hours on the weekend, so that I have some time off to myself because I think mental health is so critically important. And for chairs, we don't talk about that necessarily enough, how depleting the job can be at times. And also just the issues we're dealing with. One time my mother was staying with me and she heard me on a one-to-one with someone. I said, boy, you really like a therapist sometimes. And I'm like, yeah, sometimes it comes, it can sound like that. Although I'm not licensed as a therapist, I would never, ever call myself one. But sometimes we're digging deep, right? Especially on the personal side with people and things that are happening in their life.
Where do you feel the tension sometimes about how deep you get and how we are not licensed as therapists, though we're asked to be those? Where do you kind of draw that line in your head when you're sitting on a one-on-one and somebody goes really deep and you're like, this may be more?
Right. So I will say, perhaps this is an issue that you might want to explore with the therapist. I think around COVID, there was so many, challenges in people's relationships with a partner, with a husband, wife, and someone wanted me sort of to one-to-ones with the wife there as well. And I just said I would recommend that you try couples counseling because that's not an area that I'm not really licensed to talk about. So I don't want to do more damage and harm to someone because I'm not an expert and, I haven't gone to school for that. It does a disservice to people that have, gone to school for that and are truly subject matter experts. But right, it can be very easily to fall into that trap though, of
It
people
is.
to become a therapist. And I'm very careful of that, having been to therapy myself.
How do you foster connection? So you've talked about the connection that you have with your members. How do you foster connection between them?
A lot of it is just doing some inclusion exercises and creating an environment that's psychologically safe for people to talk about themselves and what's really happening, right? Because we don't want the member who thinks they know everything about everything and want to blow hot air into the room. They're not good members, right? They shouldn't be there. And I've had that happen where I had to have, very frank conversations saying maybe this group or my group isn't, the best for you. And that's fine. Usually they're okay with that, but sometimes it may not be, but that's okay. I have to protect the group at the end
Yeah,
of the
I love we do an inclusion exercise at the very beginning of the executive session. I have my members come up with the inclusion exercise, so they
day.
have to do it. And in our pre-meeting, I say, look, this is to get us back together again after a month. Pick the question that's going to remind everybody why they like everybody in the room. Pick
Yep.
something that's interesting to you. And one that I had that was amazing was somebody who's not very verbal. He's kind of a very direct guy. And he did, as his inclusion exercise, a rock, paper, scissors tournament. And
Loved
we
it.
had such a great time because you would go to the person next to you, you do rock, paper, scissors, then you'd go to the next person. Whoever won went to the next person. And so much fun without any words at all, right? So all of those can really bring a group together, right? And be so memorable.
So one thing I've started doing is encouraging the members to have some fun with the food that they order, especially at lunch. Because who wants to look at another sandwich, right? A turkey and cheese sandwich with salad and cookies,
If I
right?
have another Panera on the third week of the month, yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
So it started with one guy who's absolutely bonkers about Chick-fil-A. So I said, okay, order Chick-fil-A. He's always talking about it. And he did. He ordered Chick-fil-A. So everyone loved it. So the next month, there's a member from Philadelphia. And it's very much a part of him and his identity. So he ordered Philly cheesesteaks. And so I just love that because again, it's creating connection around that person, right? And their identity. And there's other ways, right, to bring that out without even asking a question sometimes, right?
Absolutely. And food is such a good way of doing that, right? Like it says so much, brings up so many memories. That's spectacular. How do you measure success of your chair practice, of your members? Like how do you maybe it's in your recruiting to say, what do I get out of this? Like what are the different ways that you measure success?
Some of it is, at the end of the meeting when people talk about what was their takeaway, what are they going to put into practice? And it can also be a good way to evaluate the speaker and to look for patterns, in the group's feedback about speakers, right? Because there are people who I think might be phenomenal, but maybe that topic really isn't of interest to people. So being very attuned to that. I have one group that is very, very hard on speakers. And so I might not have 7 speakers next year, if I can't have 7 that I think will meet the group's needs. And there's nothing wrong with that. They love their all-day executive sessions, this particular group. And so, again, being attuned to that, knowing that that's okay.
How do you evaluate speakers? Especially, we don't get to hear them before sometimes we put them in front of our group or before we book them. How do you figure out which speakers are the great ones?
Well, I have a long call with them when I'm just considering, before I even book them. I want them to go through an outline with me, talk about their purpose, their why, how do they interact and engage people, to get them immersed in the material. I ask them what they want the members to take away. What are some lessons they've learned throughout their workshops? I try to get a gauge for how flexible and collaborative they are. And there are some chairs early on that gave like 10,000 presentations that I think, oh, I have to book them. Then they're going to be so great. A lot of times they're not, to be perfectly honest, because they don't want to mix things up. And the slides look like they're from 1964, right? And the comments will be, just look at my scores, just look at my scores. And that's kind of disappointing to me. And that's not the mindset that I want. It's someone who's going to partner with me and my group. And then those other chairs are just so wonderful that really want to get to know the members and get background on them. And they know that it's about the members and not about them as a speaker. And that's really, really important. That they are not there to sell their wares, so to speak. And I've called people out on that on the spot. Like, I'll make a joke of it. Well, you've plugged yourself enough, so let's just fuck. I'm a blunt New Yorker sometimes. So.
You can get away with that. Midwesterners can't be that blunt. Even though I originally come from New York, it's just, it's not the Midwest way of doing it. So
we both talk fast, so I like that about it.
We do. What do you think we as Vistage chairs need to pay more attention to?
Certainly inclusion, really important. And by conclusion, I also mean life experience, education, of course, how people identify themselves in terms of race and gender identification and so on, and recognizing that and the importance of that. And
do you have any tips for how to do that? I think some chairs want their groups to be more diverse. I've seen, and I'll speak as a woman, right? Like they want more women in their group, but yet they don't know how to do it, right?
I will call people out. I'm gay. I had a member once who was on Zoom and someone said, oh, and he talked about combing his hair before they came on the Zoom. And then he said, oh, that's so gay. So I didn't say anything in the moment, but afterwards I talked to him about that and how inappropriate and how it made me feel and how it could make other people feel as well.
What a gift to be able to have that place in people's lives, to be able to have the trust to really call them out on something that they're probably uncomfortable about, that I assume positive intent, but to have somebody who says, oh, by the way, like this is how it made me feel. And I don't think that was your intent, but I do want to let you know what the consequence of that is.
Right. Because he's a very good guy. He's very old school. And he thanked me, for giving him that feedback.
Yeah. I
It
mean,
was
it could be a life-changing moment in terms of the way he thinks about what he says and how he says it.
absolutely.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. What if you could improve one sharing skill that you have, what would it be?
More patient sometimes.
Mm.
Just in general in life, I'm an impatient person, New Yorker. I've gotten better about that, but I guess it's just trusting the process too. Everything's gonna be okay. I know that. At the end of the day, it's proven itself time and time again. And I'm gonna have some misses. I've done some inclusion exercises which I wanted a retreat, like write a 6-word story about this exercise, and it just bombed. It sucked. It's but
Yeah.
it really did. But no one called me out over it either. I admitted it. I said, okay, this was a miss. Okay. And it's going to happen. And I made a joke about it. And they're forgiving of that too, which is great. When you've created this circle for people.
You talked about wonder, which I think is an amazing, like when we first started talking about why you do what you do, that you want to create wonder. Tell me more about that. Tell me what wonder means to you and how you create it in the group.
Well, we did this inclusion exercise from Atomic Habits. I showed a short video clip. Then I put them in breakout groups. And one member said, I just love that. I want to do this with my leadership group at our next meeting next week. And so I think that's wonder, opening up someone's eyes, right? To thinking about another way of starting a meeting, right? It's just instead of, okay, here's our agenda for today, right? So I never start a meeting like that, the agenda. I start with the video, with the statistic, with something that's, an aha moment. Some next meeting, we're going into breakout groups at the very start to talk about gratitude and not, the types of questions where everyone's going to answer family and friends, but what's a lesson you learned this year that you're most grateful for? What's an act of kindness that someone displayed to you that you're most grateful for? So, getting them to think a little differently. And a member gave me feedback once that, sometimes it can feel like with the speakers and maybe the issue processing that we're doing a lot of things wrong, right? And it's sometimes get away with that. Well, you should be doing this, you're not doing that. And so I'm very attuned to that now and making sure we celebrate, right, people's accomplishments and their achievements. And although they might be going through a poor cycle now, which a bunch of my members are, they've gone through that before and they've come across on the other side of that as well. One of the members, I think 3 members in my different groups, and he said that my name had become a verb at the company. I've been Georged, or, and I thought it was so hysterical. It's not about me. It's about the group, and Vistage is an organization, but I just thought that was so funny. It speaks to the power, right, of just the community that
What
we
is
have.
it? But can I add to that? I
Sure.
think being Georged would be doing all of that in a very caring, soft, not soft as in bad soft, but human way, right?
Thank you.
You can be that and you can say, why the hell haven't you fired that guy yet? But you could also be like, what's standing in your way? Right? That's being George. In my opinion, I've been Georged on many an occasion from George himself. And so I would say it's that accountability, but in the most human way that possible. So I think that's what being Georged is. Beautiful. Well, thank you, George. I want to thank you on my behalf. You have been such a supporter of me and that first Chair World where we met, which was the first one after COVID. And I think we sat next to each other on a bus. Maybe was the first time. And
Right.
I so appreciate you, the balance that you bring. I always know I could call you at 2 a.m. if I needed something. And you so embody what a chair I think needs to be. So I thank you for your members if they don't thank you enough. And I thank you for me as well. And thanks for agreeing to be on the podcast.
Thank you. This was fun.
In true chair spirit, let's commit with a personal action summary. What did I learn? I'm going to ask my members what it means to be Georged, or I guess Francine, or Bobbed, or Irena'd. What am I going to leverage? For those that know the DISC profiles, think about what you could accomplish if you ask the Ds to ask questions like a C would. Who will I lift? I'm going to share this episode with chairs who are working on building more inclusive groups. And where am I going to lean in? I'll discuss the concept of wonder with the next chair I talk to. You can find the resources like George's State of Being and show notes on my website at francinelasky.com. Please nominate your favorite chair by reaching out to me through Vistage email, through website, through my social media channels. Tell others about what you learned in the podcast. It helps other chairs find this podcast and strengthen our circle. With appreciation for the wisdom that we share, until next time, keep growing your chair impact.